Bom, gente, dando sequência ao nosso evento, eu vou passar a palavra agora ao nosso Keynote Speaker, Tomi Kovanen, ele que vai explicar um pouquinho da trajetória, como foi ser ex-jogador profissional de esportes e hoje está de volta ao cenário como manager da Immortals. Ele esteve aqui, mas ele vai voltar, Tomi. Uma salva de palmas, por favor.
Okay, so I think this is the portion where I then bore you a little bit more with my background. I think that was the plan. So I skipped the introduction a little earlier. We can go there now. So I actually played Counter-Strike for a living for about 7-8 years. I've been to Rio once before. That was in 2005. I went to a tournament called the CPL World Tour. So that's the first, actually my second big international tournament that I attended. That was the first time that I came to Brazil. Haven't gone since, but you know, it's nice to finally be back. In some ways, I guess I've come a full circle on that. I played Counter-Strike for a living, like I said, 7-8 years. I traveled significantly. I think I was probably traveling about 4 or 5 months every year during that time. That was before the latest gold rush. So you know, you weren't making great money back then. You were just doing it because you liked the competition, and it was just enjoyable, I think, to compete. I think traveling was a little more fun back then because it felt less of a job. You were doing it at the same time. Well, I was finishing high school. After that, I took some years off because it just wasn't possible to travel that much and still do school. But you were still very much doing it on the side. It wasn't like a career thing. It wasn't something that was gonna make enough money for you to retire on, nor something that you thought that you could do for a long period of time. So it was really more of a passing thing. I've always been good at school, so I never thought that I was gonna stay around just playing video games my whole life. I kind of wanted to see what else I could do. So in 2012, before the current version of Counter-Strike came out, I decided to quit. I went back to school. I went to college. I graduated. I studied finance, which is a little different from gaming. I moved to London and I did almost 3 years of investment banking. Did M&A at JP Morgan. So I went pretty much as far away from gaming as one could go, from playing video games, shooting people on a monitor. So I did that for 2.5 years. I kept doing stuff a lot on the side. So throughout my studies, the time I worked at JP Morgan, I would go to tournaments. I'd work as a broadcast talent. I'd be on the desk or as a commentator. I worked on one of the bigger websites for Counter-Strike. I used to guest write columns for websites like ESPN or Yahoo Sports and things like that. So I've always liked to be involved in the space, even when I was working on something else or studying. So never quite left fully. But then last fall, I was gonna make a switch. I was gonna get out of banking, just do something else. I was pretty close to getting into venture capital, which probably would have also been with an angle to esports, or at least gaming, considering what's going on. I mean, that's really my two sort of core skill sets that would have overlapped quite nicely. And then the CEO of Immortals, Noah Winston, he managed to talk me into getting back to esports full time, which is now quite nice because it means that I don't have to go to work all day and then come home and then start looking into what happened in the world of esports during the day. So now I actually get to do that in work time. So I think I don't want to bore you too much with the stuff that I've done. So if you have any questions, I think that might be a more interesting use of this time. So like I said, you know, I work on the business, or like others said, since I didn't really get that far yet, I work on the business operations of the CSGO division for Immortals. So we haven't yet announced the team. I know there are some rumors that specifically intrigue this part of the world with regards to that. It's not something that, you know, we're ready to talk about yet or can say anything about. But I think this might be a good time to take some questions. Go ahead.
About the management of the board, I would like to know about the draft, how you find talent.
Well, I
would like to try bring it to Brazil.
Sure. So I think at the very highest level, you don't really work with the way Counter-Strike is currently structured, you don't really work with a draft-like structure, like you would in, say, you know, American football, where they just held the draft last night, or basketball, where you go through high school, you go through college, you play for your college team, or, you know, say soccer, where you actually just play for clubs, and then eventually you turn 18 and you are eligible to play for the big team. So in that sense, esports, and especially Counter-Strike, is different, because you can at any point join a team that is of your skill set, as long as you're, I think 16 is for the most tournaments, the age limit that you have to be. So for the highest level of games, which is what we're generally working with, it's not so much looking into the talent as it is just seeing who are performing best at any given time. I think there are obviously other teams who work much more so with which sort of trying to identify undervalued players who are just about to break through, playing at lower levels. And I think, frankly, to do that, you just need a lot of expertise in that very specific game domain. So it's like if you were to think about how to spot the next Neymar, you'd have to really understand soccer, because otherwise you wouldn't know what you're looking for in a 14-year-old. So I think that basically applies for Counter-Strike. It's still a little different from that, because there's no substitutes. So you really work with 5-man teams at all times. No team has a 6th player. So it's not like soccer, football, basketball, or ice hockey, where you might have a team of, let's say, 4 lineups on the actual roster. But really you only play with, or you rely on the best ones, and then the others kind of fill the roster. In Counter-Strike, and in most esports, frankly, not to the same extent as Counter-Strike, but in most esports, you don't get the same fatigue effect. You don't really get injuries the same way. You don't have to play an 82-game regular season that you have to worry about someone twisting their ankle somewhere along the way. So that's why you get to use the same 5-man roster throughout all of it. So you don't have substitutions. And that's what makes it really hard for an outsider to work with a team, because it's really a very tight-knit group. It's already hard if you have effectively a 10-man basketball team and you want to trade 2 players. That's 20% of your team that you'd have to change, and you have to kind of make sure that on some level the players, you know, they function together personally, they get along. Well, then you think about Counter-Strike. First of all, there's a lot of strong personalities in Counter-Strike. I think it's in some ways it's a product of how the scene is evolving. If you're a good player, you just get a lot of popularity from a young age. So I think that, you know, that sort of has an impact on people. And you don't have a coach who can sort of put you in your place. You don't have someone who can just bench you, because again, there's no substitutes. There's nothing you can do if someone's acting up unless you're actually willing to bench them and actively get a whole new player. So I think there's quite a few challenges in that sense, but in some ways you have to really work with a team to understand what a team needs specifically for that team, because even if you could get a better player, that player might not be the best fit for a specific situation. So you really have to understand the game at a high level, much like in any sport, but then you have to spend a lot more time figuring out the right fit in terms of personalities and things like that. Go ahead.
How Immortals and others North American franchises are looking for Brazil? Like, you think it's a market that you're gonna expand? I don't know. There's any plan for Brazil, like come to Brazil or use the Brazilian crowd to improve your business?
So we previously had a Brazilian Counter-Strike team until late last year, for quite some time actually. That was before I joined the company, so I can't speak to that in that sense. What I can speak to is the future plans to some extent. Can't go into any detail because unfortunately we're not ready to talk about them yet. But Noah's previously said that we will, as an organization, not necessarily in Counter-Strike, have Brazilians playing for us in the future. So there's something there, and you know, we just think Brazil is a great market. There's a lot of interest for esports, especially for Counter-Strike. I think the way that the ESL 1 event in Belo Horizonte that's taking place in June, the way it sold out, I think it was something, maybe Leo here can help us out, but I think it was something like an hour where all the tickets were sold. I mean, it's just a lot of interest here. It's a very big market. At the same time, it's still very much developing. So I think there's a lot of synergies potentially in being able to sort of take what you think might be the best practices in another market and be able to apply them in some way somewhere else. So we think Brazil is very, very intriguing as a market, and we're gonna be doing some stuff here in the future, I hope. Go ahead, Leo.
Hello, Tommy. Which other countries do you see as potential, like Brazil has in esports, besides Brazil? Because Brazil has a tough reality inside when you look at it from inside, but I think that in esports we are very successful. Even in fighting games, some fighting game players are beginning to get better positions in championships, international championships. So which other countries do you see as that maybe has potential to achieve great things in esports?
So I think in many ways, esports is the great equalizer in the sense that you don't need a lot of infrastructure to build a successful esports franchise or to do well in that. So, I mean, for example, Brazilian Counter-Strike has greatly been helped by the best teams being able to move overseas and work there, which then has sparked a lot of interest in the country. In general, though, you don't need stadiums to practice Counter-Strike or practice League of Legends. You only need a computer and a somewhat working internet connection. Even that, I mean, people play with some poor connections globally still to this day, but it's getting better. So I think in esports, it's much easier to catch up than almost any kind of competition, really. The entry barriers are a lot smaller. You really just, like I said, just a computer or a console of some kind and an internet connection will do. That'll allow you to compete with basically the best players in the world if you're good enough. You don't necessarily need to build infrastructure for decades. You don't need to have very advanced ways to nurture talent from the time that they're 5. I mean, someone who's interested in soccer at 14, they're probably just missed the boat. It's just too late. You have to have more years in you to start playing. With esports, many of the best players started playing when they're 14, 15. So it's a lot less of a runway to get to the top, and maybe that will change. But I think at least for the time being, it's a lot easier to catch up. So I think that door really is open to anybody. Go ahead.
You guys, of course, with Immortals brand, you navigate into the biggest franchises. So you had the team in League of Legends and now the Overwatch League. And you also, of course, very successful with Counter-Strike. So the question is this one, open format or a closed format?
Well, that's a tough question, isn't it? So just to clarify, I think with open or closed format, Leo's talking about the open circuit, which, for example, we have in Counter-Strike, where anybody can effectively host tournaments, and if they have good enough conditions, enough prize money, it'll gather interest from the best teams in the world, versus what is more like known as the North American style of running things, such as the NFL or the NBA, where you have a closed league, you have the exact franchises in there year after year, and there's no relegation. So either you have a seat at the table or you don't. So first of all, I think if you're a businessman, you obviously want to own a franchise. There's no question about it. It's just a better business. You have a limited monopoly in the sense that no one else can really compete. All the best players, all the best talent will want to be in your league. At the same time, I think if you're a player and for the ecosystem to continue developing players, I think the open circuit has a lot of advantages. So if we think about it in this way, currently you could be the most talented 12-year-old in the world in Counter-Strike because it has the open circuit. And within a couple years, you could be playing at basically any tournament in the world because there's open qualifiers. You could play online qualifiers to get to the biggest tournaments that happen every year, almost all of the biggest tournaments. And it's literally open for everybody. That's unheard of if you think about traditional sports. There's no place where even if you actually happen to gather the most skilled basketball team that just never played basketball officially, just played pickup games in their backyard, but they actually happen to be better than LeBron. I mean, you just would have no way of finding that out because they couldn't play anything. The only thing they would have is they could try out in some lower level league, then maybe get noticed, maybe one at a time get picked up somewhere. So I think the open circuit has a lot of advantages in that. And I think our time's up.